Snow fell soft against the window of Morrison Ranch, each flake catching lamplight like scattered diamonds. Samuel Morrison sat in his study, 86 years old now, fingers tracing the worn leather cover of a Bible that had outlived its owner by nearly 5 decades. His granddaughter Emma, 12 years old, with her mother's dark eyes perched on the ottoman beside his chair. Beyond the frosted glass, a single lamp burned in the stable. It had burned there every Christmas Eve for 47 years. Emma followed her grandfather's gaze. "Tell me about the lamp, Grandpa. Why do you light it every year?" Samuel's weathered hands stilled on the Bible. "That lamp, child, saved my life. And it all began one Christmas Eve when I was the biggest coward in Montana Territory." The fire crackled. Emma waited. Samuel opened the Bible. A telegram fell out, yellowed and creased from 1,000 readings. He didn't pick it up. Didn't need to. Every word was carved into his soul. "It started," he said quietly, with a choice. "The kind that haunts a man forever." The charity hospital smelled of carbolic acid and death. Catherine Morrison lay in a narrow bed in a room barely larger than a closet, her 23 years, burning away with fever. Scarlet fever, the doctor had said. Advanced. Nothing to be done now, but wait. Her hand clutched a telegram, the paper damp from her grip. The words swam before her eyes, but she knew them by heart. Had paid her last 50 cents to send them 3 weeks ago. "Tommy, baby coming, no money, no one. Please come. See." The baby moved inside her, weak flutters that came less often now. She'd stopped feeling her own body days ago. There was only heat and darkness and the slow drift towards something vast and final. Sister Mary, the volunteer nurse, pressed a damp cloth to Catherine's forehead. "Your brother still hasn't come, child." Catherine's lips moved. "He's busy. Important business. He'll come." But her eyes tracked to the empty hallway beyond the door. No footsteps, no telegram in reply, just silence stretching like a condemnation. The baby kicked one last time. Catherine's breath rattled. Sister Mary reached for the emergency bell, but her hand moved through water, through time, through futility. Catherine Morrison died at 3 in the morning. The baby, a girl, followed her mother an hour later. They were buried together in the paupers section of Denver Municipal Cemetery. Plot 447, row 12. No headstone, no mourners. The telegram lay on the floor where it had fallen, spotted with blood that would turn brown and permanent. 500 miles north in Montana Territory. Samuel Morrison slept dreamless in his new ranch house, built with money from the land deal that had closed 3 days after his sister sent her desperate plea. He would not learn of her death for another week. The law office in Helena smelled of cigars and ambition. Samuel Morrison, 34 years old and lean as a wolf, sat across from 3 men who represented everything he'd worked toward for a decade. James Carver, silver-haired and shrewd. Daniel Preston, owner of the territory's largest timber operation. And Henderson, the lawyer whose signature would make or break empires. Papers covered the table between them. Survey maps marked in red ink showed 5,000 acres of prime Montana grassland, creek access, timber stands, grazing land that could support 2,000 head of cattle. The asking price was $12,000, nearly every cent Samuel had saved since he was 20 years old. Henderson pushed the contract forward. "Just your signature here, Mr. Morrison, and the land is yours." Samuel picked up the pen. His hand was steady. This was the moment that separated men from boys, success from failure, legacy from obscurity. He'd been waiting for this his entire adult life. The door burst open. A telegraph boy, 14 and breathless, stumbled into the dignified silence. "Telegram from Mr. Samuel Morrison, urgent from Denver." Samuel's jaw tightened. He took the yellow paper, unfolded it with deliberate calm. Read it once. His hand trembled. Just slightly. Just enough. "Tommy. Baby coming. No money. No one. Please come. See, Catherine." His little sister, 23 years old. The baby was due in March. It was November. 3 months early meant trouble. Meant danger. Meant she needed him now. He looked at the contract. $12,000, 5,000 acres, the foundation of everything he'd planned. He looked at the telegram. "Please come." Carver cleared his throat. "Everything all right, Morrison, just a family matter." Samuel folded the telegram, slid it into his vest pocket. "Nothing urgent," he signed his name. "Samuel J. Morrison, Bold strokes, confident, binding. Henderson smiled. Congratulations, Mr. Morrison. You're now the largest landowner in Cedar Ridge. They shook hands, opened expensive whiskey, toasted success and prosperity and the future of Montana Territory. Samuel's hand went to his pocket 3 times during the celebration. Each time he stopped himself. After the deal closes, he thought, I'll go visit after everything's settled. Catherine will understand. She knows how important this is. He left Helena the next morning with a deed to 5,000 acres and a telegram he hadn't answered. He told himself he'd send a reply that evening. Then the next day, then next week, there was so much to do. Hiring hands, building the ranch house, planning the spring cattle drive. Surely Catherine understood. Surely she could wait a few weeks. 3 days after Samuel signed his contract, Catherine Morrison sent a second telegram to Morrison Ranch, Cedar Ridge, Montana Territory. It arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Samuel was supervising the frame construction of his new barn. The telegraph office boy rode out personally, knowing wealthy ranchers tipped well. Samuel opened it, standing in ankle-deep mud, the Montana winter wind cutting through his coat. Mr. Samuel Morrison, Catherine Morrison deceased, baby stillborn, body unclaimed at Denver Charity Hospital. Please advise. Sister Mary St. Vincent's Mission. The paper fell from his hands, landed in the mud. The ink began to run. The telegraph boy waited for a reply. Sir, do you want to send a message back? Samuel couldn't speak, couldn't move. The barn frame stood skeletal against gray sky. 5,000 acres stretched around him. Everything he'd wanted, everything he'd worked for, everything he'd chosen over his sister's life. No reply, he finally said. His voice came from somewhere outside his body. No reply. The boy left. Samuel stood in the mud until dark. When he finally moved, he retrieved the telegram. Mud-stained, bleeding ink. He folded it carefully and placed it in his vest pocket next to the first telegram he'd never answered. Both telegrams would stay there, in that pocket, in every vest and coat he owned, for the next 5 years. A penance that changed nothing. A reminder that arrived too late. Samuel Morrison stood in his study at 11 o'clock on the holiest night of the year. He was 39 now. His hair showed silver at the temples, lines carved deep around his mouth. 5 years had passed since Catherine's death. Sometimes it felt like 50, sometimes like yesterday. The ranch house rose 2 stories, 6 bedrooms, all empty. His wife Sarah had died 7 years ago, taken by the same scarlet fever that would later claim Catherine. They'd had no children. Sarah couldn't carry them. 3 miscarriages in 4 years of marriage. The last one nearly killed her. The fever finished what grief had started. So Samuel lived alone in a house built for a family that would never arrive. 14 rooms, most of them dark, most of them gathering dust despite the housekeeper he'd employed, until Mrs. Chen retired last month to live with her daughter in San Francisco. He'd told her to go, told her family was important, told her not to waste time. He wondered if she heard the desperation in his voice. Catherine's Bible sat open on his desk. He'd kept it, the only thing of hers he'd been able to retrieve from the charity hospital after paying for her burial. They'd given him the Bible and a small bag of her belongings, a dress, a pair of shoes, a handkerchief embroidered with her initials, everything she'd owned in the world. The Bible fell open to Psalms. Catherine's handwriting filled the margins. Tommy, remember when we used to read this together? You always liked verse 17 best. He'd been 12, she'd been 7. Their mother made them read together every Sunday afternoon. He'd complained, wanted to be outside with his friends. Catherine had sat close, her small shoulder pressed against his arm, following along with her finger. When did that stop? When did he stop being her protector and become her abandoner? Samuel picked up the first telegram. 5 years old now, the paper was nearly transparent from handling. Tommy, baby coming, no money, no one. Please come. See. 3 sentences, 17 words, a lifetime of guilt. He poured whiskey. Expensive. The best Montana Territory had to offer. His hand shook. He set the glass down without drinking. Alcohol didn't help. Nothing helped. The guilt lived in his bones now, permanent as marrow. The ranch spread 5,000 acres around him. He'd added another 2,000 in the year since Catherine died. He ran 1,200 head of cattle, employed 15 ranch hands, had contracts with railroads and army forts and cattle buyers from Chicago. He was by any measure successful. He was also alone. Completely. Absolutely. Alone in a way that had nothing to do with people and everything to do with deserving. The clock struck 11:30. Church had let out an hour ago. Cedar Ridge families were home now, celebrating with their children, eating late supper, opening presents, singing carols. Samuel looked around his empty house. The parlor was Sarah's piano, untouched since her death, the dining room with a table that sat 12 and fed one, the bedrooms upstairs where ghosts of children who'd never been born whispered in the dark. All this for what he stood. Put on his sheepskin coat, his Stetson, wool gloves. The Montana night was bitter cold. Stars burned overhead like accusations. His breath came out in clouds. The stable needs checking, he told himself. Just making sure everything's secure for the night. But he knew it was a lie. The stable was fine. Jake would have checked it. Samuel just needed to move, needed to escape the empty rooms and the weight of his own thoughts. He walked across the yard, boots crunching on frozen snow. The main house glowed behind him, warm and lonely. Ahead, the stable loomed dark except for a thin line of light visible through the crack in the door. Samuel stopped. Lamplight. At midnight, on Christmas Eve. Someone was in his stable. He moved forward slowly, heard the sound now. Rhythmic, repetitive. The scrape of bristles on wood. Someone was scrubbing the stable floor. He pulled the door open. Lamplight spilled into the night. A woman knelt in the center aisle near stall 7, her back to him. She wore a threadbare gray dress and a thin shawl. Her hands moved in steady circles, scrubbing the wooden floor with a stiff brush. A bucket of water sat beside her, steam rising thin in the cold air. Samuel stepped inside. The woman didn't hear him. She paused in her work, sat back on her heels, and blew on her hands. Even from here, Samuel could see they were red and raw. She rubbed them together, trying to restore feeling, then dipped the brush and returned to scrubbing. The stable floor gleamed where she'd worked, cleaner than Samuel had seen it in years. Jake was supposed to do this work. Clearly, Jake had been lying about doing it. Samuel cleared his throat. The woman gasped, spun around. The brush flew from her hand, clattered against the wall. Water sloshed from the bucket. She scrambled to her feet, backing away, one hand raised as if to ward off a blow. "I'm sorry, Mr. Morrison." Her voice shook. "The foreman said I could work tonight. He said you wouldn't mind. I'll go right now. I'll leave. I'm sorry." She bent to gather her things, hands trembling so badly she dropped the brush twice. "Wait." Samuel kept his voice gentle, kept his hands visible, took no step forward. "Mrs. Fletcher, please wait." She froze, looked up at him. Her face was gaunt cheekbones, too prominent, but her jaw was set firm. Not broken, not defeated. Just bent under weight no one should carry alone. "You're Margaret Fletcher." It wasn't a question. Everyone in Cedar Ridge knew her story. Widow, scandal, fallen. "Yes, sir." She straightened slightly. "I can do honest work, Mr. Morrison. I don't take charity. I'm not offering charity." They stood in the lamplight, horses shifting in their stalls, hay rustling. Samuel studied her. She'd been the school teacher once, 5 years ago, before her husband died and the debts came to light. Now she scrubbed stables for coins. Samuel saw Catherine in her face. Not a physical resemblance, but the same exhaustion, the same pride-fighting fear, the same look of someone who'd been judged by people who'd never walked her road. "Where are you staying, Mrs. Fletcher?" Her chin lifted. "Mrs. Harding's boarding house. 3rd Street, week to week, week to week." That meant barely surviving. One missed payment from the street. Samuel had seen it before. Good people ground down by circumstance in a town's cold judgment. "How long have you been cleaning stables?" "Long enough to know I can do honest work." Her voice stayed level. "I don't take charity, Mr. Morrison. I understand." Samuel walked past her to the tack room, found his thermos, poured coffee into the tin cup. Steam rose in the cold air like visible prayer. He walked back and set the cup on a bench near where she stood. Then he stepped back, way back, gave her space. "Drink it. It's cold out here." She stared at the cup like it might vanish, like kindness was a trick she'd learned not to trust. Her hands reached toward it, then pulled back, reached again, finally wrapped around the warmth. She didn't drink, just held the cup, let the heat seep into her frozen fingers. A single tear tracked down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly. "Thank you, sir." Samuel leaned against the wall, studied the floor she'd cleaned, better than Jake had done in years. Actually clean instead of just pushed around. "My housekeeper retired last month. Moved to San Francisco. House needs managing. Cooking, mending, keeping things in order. Guest cottage on the property. 2 rooms, fireplace, pantry stocked. Fair wages, steady work." He paused. "You could start after Christmas." Margaret Fletcher's face went carefully blank. She set down the coffee, stood straight despite her exhaustion. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Morrison. Truly, but I know what people would say. Rich rancher and a widow living on the same property." She shook her head. "I won't give this town more ammunition against either of us." Samuel studied her. Pride and fear warred in her eyes. This town had already broken her once. She wouldn't give them the chance to do it again. "You deserve a better life than this." She flinched like he'd struck her. "I don't need pity." "Good. Because I don't hire out of charity. I hire competence." He glanced at the floor. "These floors have never been this clean. Jake's been lying to me about his work for months." Something flickered in her eyes, not quite hope. Maybe the shadow of it. "The offer stands, Mrs. Fletcher." "Think about it." Samuel straightened, pulled his coat tighter. "Guest cottage has a fireplace. Pantry stocked. Wages are fair and paid on time." He walked to the stable door, paused with his hand on the frame, turned back. "Merry Christmas, Mrs. Fletcher." Then he disappeared into the night, leaving his thermos behind. Margaret sank onto a hay bale. The coffee cup warmed her hands but couldn't touch the cold inside her. Tears froze on her cheeks before they could fall. Outside, wind howled through Cedar Ridge like the voice of every choice she'd ever had to make alone. She pulled a small leather purse from her pocket, opened it with shaking hands, counted the coins inside. 3 quarters, 8 dimes, 2 nickels, 7 pennies, $3.47. Everything she had in the world. Next week's rent was $5. She was already $1.53 short. Mrs. Harding had been patient, but patience had limits, especially when Vernon Blackwood came around, asking questions about the widow Fletcher and whether she'd paid her debts yet. Margaret pulled out the business card Samuel had left on the bench. Heavy cardstock, embossed letters, Morrison Ranch, 2 miles west of Cedar Ridge. She turned it over. Handwriting on the back. His handwriting. Guest cottage has fireplace. Pantry stocked. Wages fair paid on time. SM, $15 a month. Room and board. It was more than she made in 2 months of scrubbing and mending and teaching in secret. It was survival, maybe even dignity, but it was also scandal. More ammunition for a town that had already decided she was ruined. One more thing for them to whisper about. One more reason to cross the street when she walked past, and what it would do to Samuel Morrison. The richest rancher in the territory. Good reputation. Respected. One word about impropriety and he'd lose contracts. Partnerships. Standing. Everything he'd built. She couldn't do that to him. Couldn't be the second woman to destroy a good man's life. But she also couldn't scrub floors forever. Couldn't survive on $3.47. Couldn't keep going like this week to week, barely breathing one step from the street. Margaret looked at the stable around her. Clean floors, fresh hay, warm horses, a roof that didn't leak. She thought about her room at Mrs. Harding's. Barely bigger than this stall. Cold. Damp. Walls so thin she could hear every conversation, every judgment, every whispered condemnation. The business card trembled in her hand. She folded it carefully, placed it in her pocket next to the $3.47 that stood between her and nothing. Tomorrow, she thought. I'll decide tomorrow. But she knew that was a lie too. Samuel hadn't slept. Catherine's Bible lay open on his desk, the telegram beside it. He'd read both a dozen times through the long night. The clock showed 6 in the morning. Gray light filtered through the windows, turning his study cold and colorless. He'd watched for Margaret Fletcher all night, hoping and dreading in equal measure. Hoping she'd come, dreading what it would mean if she did. The guest cottage sat dark and empty exactly as he'd left it. She wouldn't come. Too proud, too afraid, too aware of what the town would say. Samuel stood, walked to the window, looked out at the road that led to Cedar Ridge, empty, white with fresh snow, no footprints, no sign of life. He poured coffee, black and bitter, exactly how Catherine used to make it when they were young, before everything went wrong, before he chose land over blood. Movement caught his eye, a small figure on the road, walking, carrying something. Samuel's cup froze halfway to his mouth. He set it down, walked closer to the window, squinted against the snow glare. Margaret Fletcher, walking up the ranch road, a small bag in her hand, her thin shawl dusted with snow. But her chin was up, her steps steady. She'd come, against pride, against fear, against every voice telling her to stay invisible. She'd cross the threshold. Samuel's heart hammered against his ribs. 5 years of guilt, 5 years of ghosts, 5 years of empty rooms and emptier purpose. And here came a woman who'd lost everything, choosing to trust him with what little she had left. Neither of them could go back now. He met her at the door. She stood on the porch, small and determined and terrified. Snow melted in her hair. Her bag looked like it weighed nothing because it contained nothing. Everything she owned in one small bundle. Mrs. Harding evicted me this morning. Her voice was steady, stronger than it had been last night. Mr. Blackwood came by yesterday. She got frightened, said she couldn't harbor someone with debts. Samuel said nothing, waited. If the offer still stands, Mr. Morrison, I'd like to accept. I'll work hard. I'll earn every penny. I promise you won't regret this. Samuel stepped aside. Welcome home, Mrs. Fletcher. She walked past him into the house, into warmth, into light, into a life that would change them both in ways neither could imagine. The stable lamp still burned in the distance. Snow continued falling. Christmas morning broke over Morrison Ranch with the quiet promise of redemption that neither Samuel nor Margaret quite believed in yet. But belief, like love, doesn't arrive all at once. It builds, slowly, through small gestures and smaller kindnesses, through choices made in the dark that only make sense in the light. Samuel closed the door. Outside, the wind carried away their tracks. Inside, something new and fragile began. The ghost of Catherine Morrison watched from whatever place the dead keep vigil. She'd wanted rescue once, had begged for it, had died without it. But perhaps this was rescue too. Not for her, too late for her, but for her brother, for the woman he'd found on Christmas Eve, for the chance to choose right when choosing right cost everything. The lamp in the stable would burn for one more day. Tomorrow, Samuel would let it go out. But next Christmas Eve, he'd light it again. And the Christmas after that. And every Christmas Eve for the next 47 years. Because some lights aren't meant to guide you home. They're meant to remind you why home matters, why people matter, why choosing love over fear and mercy over judgment and compassion over comfort are the only choices that ever really count. Samuel led Margaret Fletcher to the guest cottage, showed her the rooms that would be hers, watched her face transform when she saw the stock pantry, the clean quilts, the fireplace already burning. Mrs. Morrison. She touched the quilt like it might disappear. This is more than I expected. She looked at him, tears in her eyes. This is grace. Samuel nodded. Sometimes we get more than we deserve, Mrs. Fletcher. Sometimes that's the only thing that saves us. He left her there, walked back to the main house, stood in his empty study, picked up Catherine's telegram one more time. I'm sorry, he whispered. I can't bring you back, but I can try. I can try to do better, try to be better. Try to choose right this time. He folded the telegram, placed it back in the Bible, closed the cover gently. Outside, Christmas morning light turned the snow to diamonds. Inside, Samuel Morrison felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Hope, small and fragile and terrifying, but hope nonetheless. The story was just beginning. The guest cottage smelled of wood smoke and possibility. Margaret Fletcher stood in the center of the small sitting room, her bag still clutched in both hands, afraid that if she set it down, this dream would shatter like ice underfoot. The fireplace crackled. Real heat. Not the phantom warmth you imagined into existence on the coldest nights. Not the memory of comfort. Actual flames throwing actual light across actual walls that would shelter her through actual nights. She set the bag down, slowly, half expecting the floor to give way. It held. The pantry door stood open where Samuel had left it. Margaret walked over, looked inside. 20 pounds of flour, 10 pounds of sugar, coffee beans in a sealed tin, salt, baking soda, yeast in a small crock, dried beans, rice, salt pork wrapped in cloth, canned vegetables in neat rows, dried apples, cornmeal, enough food for 2 months, maybe 3 if she was careful. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the doorframe. 2 years. 2 years of counting pennies and skipping meals and telling herself that hunger was just another kind of cold you learn to live with. 2 years of watching other people eat while she scraped their plates. 2 years of carrying the hollow ache of not enough in her belly and her bones and her soul. And here was enough, more than enough. Abundance she hadn't dared imagine. Margaret Fletcher sat on the floor of her new pantry and cried. Not the careful, silent tears she'd learned at Mrs. Harding's boarding house, where walls were thin and judgment thinner. These were the kind of tears that came from somewhere deep and broken, the kind that bent you double and stole your breath and left you empty in a way that felt like healing. When she finished, the fire had burned lower. She stood, washed her face in the basin Samuel had filled, looked at herself in the small mirror above the washstand. Same gaunt face, same exhausted eyes, but something different too. Something she'd thought lost forever. Dignity, the kind that comes from having a door you can close, a bed that's yours, a pantry you can open without asking permission. She unpacked her bag, 3 dresses, all mended, all worn thin. Mother's brooch wrapped in a handkerchief, Robert's wedding ring on a chain, a small Bible with her name inscribed on the first page, a photograph of her parents both dead 10 years now. Everything she owned fit on a single shelf. She hung the dresses on pegs, placed the brooch on the dresser, the Bible on the bedside table, the photograph beside it. The room looked less empty, almost like someone lived here, almost like home. Through the window she could see the main house, lights glowing in the kitchen, Samuel Morrison moving past a window, preparing his own Christmas breakfast because his housekeeper had quit, and his wife was 7 years dead, and his sister was 5 years buried in a pauper's grave he'd paid to mark after it was too late to matter. Everyone carried ghosts. Margaret knew that now. The difference was whether your ghost drove you toward cruelty or compassion, whether they made you smaller or forced you to become large enough to hold both your failures and your future. Samuel Morrison had chosen compassion, had offered her a chance when offering chances could cost him everything. That meant something. That meant maybe the world wasn't just hard edges and harsh judgments. Maybe there was still softness somewhere, still grace. Margaret looked at the clock, 6:30 in the morning. Samuel had said work started at 6. She was already late. She pinned up her hair, put on her cleanest dress, wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, walked across the yard to the main house, boots crunching in new snow. The kitchen door was unlocked. She entered quietly. Samuel stood at the stove attempting to cook eggs. The pan smoked. The eggs looked like leather. Mr. Morrison. He turned, saw her. Something crossed his face. Relief, maybe? Or just acknowledgement that she'd really come, that he hadn't imagined their conversation in the stable. Mrs. Fletcher, you didn't need to start today. Christmas morning, you should rest. I'd rather work. She moved to the stove. May I? He stepped aside, handed her the spatula, watched as she scraped his ruined eggs into the scrap bucket and started fresh. She moved with efficiency born from necessity, cracked 4 eggs, added a splash of water to make them fluffy, adjusted the heat, found bread and butter and made toast while the eggs cooked. 10 minutes later, Samuel Morrison sat at his dining table eating the first real breakfast he'd had in a month. He didn't speak, just ate, slowly, like he'd forgotten food could taste like this. Margaret poured coffee, set the pot on a trivet, sat down across from him, uncertain. At Mrs. Harding's, servants never sat with the employers, but Samuel had gestured to the chair, had poured her coffee too. They ate in silence, not uncomfortable, just quiet, Two people with too much history learning to exist in the present. When they finished, Samuel stood, carried his plate to the sink, turned back. I should show you the house, so you know what needs doing. Yes, sir. And Mrs. Fletcher, his voice stopped her at the door. You'll take your meals here, at this table. You're not a servant, you're managing my household. There's a difference. Something tight in Margaret's chest loosened, just slightly, just enough to let her breathe deeper. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. He nodded, showed her through the house, 6 bedrooms, all closed off but his, dust everywhere, curtains drawn, rooms that had been dark so long they'd forgotten what light looked like. Margaret assessed, made mental notes, priorities. The house wasn't dirty, just neglected, lonely, a place where someone lived but nobody dwelled, where meals were eaten but not enjoyed, where nights were endured but not rested through. She could fix this, not quickly, but steadily, one room at a time, one window at a time, one small act of care at a time, until the house remembered it was supposed to be a home. They ended the tour in the study. Samuel's private space. Books lined the walls. A massive desk dominated the center. Papers organized in neat stacks. Ledgers recording the business of running 7,000 acres in 1,200 head of cattle and 15 ranch hands in contracts with railroads and army forts and cattle buyers from Chicago. Margaret's eyes caught on the Bible. Old, well-worn, a woman's Bible. Beside it, a telegram so old it was nearly transparent. Samuel saw her looking. Didn't explain. Didn't need to. Everyone carried ghosts. The first week passed in a blur of work. Margaret woke before dawn, started the kitchen stove, made breakfast, coffee strong and black, eggs, bacon when they had it, biscuits when she had time, oatmeal when she didn't. Samuel ate at 6:30, precisely, then disappeared to run his ranch, checking cattle, mending fence, meeting with Jake Patterson, his foreman, dealing with the endless small crises that came with owning land and livestock. Margaret cleaned, started with the kitchen, scrubbed every surface, washed every dish, organized the pantry by category, found a mouse nest behind the stove and removed it, washed the curtains and hung them to dry, mopped the floor until it shone. By the third day, the kitchen looked like a different room. By the end of the week, it felt like the heart of the house again. She moved to the dining room, opened the curtains, light flooded in after years of darkness. Dust motes danced in the beams. She beat the rugs on the porch, polished the table, washed the windows inside and out, found Sarah Morrison's good china in the cabinet, and washed each piece carefully, respectfully, handling another woman's dreams with gentle hands. In the evening, she cooked. Real meals, roast chicken with mashed potatoes, beef stew with vegetables, fresh bread that filled the house with yeast and warmth, desserts when she had sugar, pie from the dried apples, cookies when she could spare the butter. Samuel ate everything she put in front of him, never complained, rarely commented, but she saw the way he paused, sometimes fork halfway to his mouth, like he'd forgotten food could be this good, like he'd forgotten what it meant to have someone care, whether he ate well or poorly or at all. On the 4th day, she found his mending, a pile of shirts in his bedroom all needing repair. Torn seams, missing buttons, frayed cuffs, he'd set them aside as beyond saving. Margaret took them to the cottage, spent the afternoon with needle and thread, whip stitch for the seams, carefully matched thread for the cuffs, buttons from a tin she found in the kitchen. By evening, all 7 shirts were mended, better than mended, reinforced, made to last. She folded them carefully, left them on his chair in the study with a note. These are good shirts, worth saving. M.F. Samuel found them after supper, picked one up, examined the stitching. Professional work, and the kind that came from years of necessity and natural skill. He put the shirt on. Perfect fit. The seam that had torn was now the strongest part. The next morning, fresh firewood appeared outside Margaret's cottage, neatly stacked, enough for 2 weeks. She recognized Samuel's axe work, the particular way he split wood, clean, efficient, more than necessary. She said nothing. That evening she made his favorite meal, pot roast with carrots and onions, gravy rich and dark, biscuits light as clouds. They were learning a language that existed outside words. Small kindnesses exchanged like currency, like promises, like the beginning of something neither would name, but both recognized. On the eighth day, Margaret woke to find a coat draped over her chair. Wool, practical, warm, her size. A note pinned to the collar. Winter's cold. Montana doesn't forgive. SM. She put it on. Fit perfectly. Warmer than anything she'd owned in 2 years. She wore it all day. That evening, Samuel got second helpings of beef stew and 3 of her biscuits. On the 10th day, books appeared on the parlor table. Shakespeare, Emerson, Montana Territorial History, agricultural journals. A note beside them. Borrow any you like. A mind needs feeding, same as a body. SM. Margaret took the Emerson, read by lamplight in her cottage until midnight. The next day at dinner, she quoted a line. For every minute you are angry, you lose 60 seconds of happiness. Samuel paused mid-bite. Emerson was a wise man and an optimist. Margaret set down her fork. Sometimes I envy that. Sometimes I do too. Their first real conversation. Beyond instructions and thank yous and the practical necessities of running a household. Something more. Something that felt like two people remembering they were people. On Sunday, Margaret played the piano. Just hymns. Just in the evening. But Samuel heard, stood in his study doorway, and listened to the first music his house had known in 7 years. He didn't cry, but his eyes were wet when he closed them and let the sound wash over him like absolution he didn't deserve and couldn't refuse. Jake Patterson noticed the changes. He'd been Samuel's foreman for 12 years, knew the man better than most, knew the grief that had turned him silent, the guilt that had made him careful, the loneliness that had carved him hollow. Now Samuel smiled sometimes, not often, but sometimes. Came in from the range with something less than exhaustion on his face. The main house glowed warm at night. Smelled like bread and wood smoke and life. Jake found Samuel in the barn one afternoon checking a mare close to foaling. House looks different, boss. Samuel glanced up. Mrs. Fletcher is an excellent housekeeper. That's not what I meant, I know. They worked in silence for a moment, Jake running his hand down the mare's leg, Samuel checking her teeth. Men are talking. Let them talk. You sure about this? Samuel straightened, met Jake's eyes. Never been more sure of anything in my life. Town's not going to like it. Town can go to hell. Jake grinned. For what it's worth, the hands, and I think you're doing right. House feels like a home again. You seem... He paused, less haunted. Samuel returned to the mare, ran his hand down her swollen belly, felt the foal kick. Sometimes, Jake, we get a second chance, even when we don't deserve it, even when it comes in a form we don't expect. I'm not fool enough to waste it. Jake nodded, knew better than to push. But as he left, he said quietly, just be careful. People can be cruel when they're scared, and nothing scares folks more than seeing someone choose different than they would. Samuel watched him go. Knew Jake was right. Knew the storm was coming, could feel it building like pressure before lightning. But he'd survived storms before, and this time he wouldn't be surviving alone. The third Sunday in January, Samuel invited Margaret to join him for supper. At the dining table, not as employer and employee, as something closer to equals. She hesitated. That's not proper, Mr. Morrison. Proper is eating good food alone in an empty house while the woman who cooked it eats alone in a cottage 50 feet away. His voice was firm, kind but firm. I'm asking as a friend, not as an employer. She agreed, dressed in her best dress, the blue one she'd worn on Christmas, pinned her mother's brooch at the collar, walked to the main house with her heart beating too fast. They ate roast chicken and winter vegetables. Talked about small things at first, the weather, the pregnant mare, the new calf born that morning despite the cold. Then Samuel asked about her teaching. What did you teach Mrs. Fletcher? Margaret's face transformed. Eyes lit up like someone had turned a lamp on inside her. She sat forward, hands moved as she talked. Literature, poetry, history, arithmetic for the younger ones. I had 34 students, ages 6 to 14, one-room schoolhouse outside Cedar Ridge. She talked about Emma Peterson, who couldn't read at 8. Everyone said she was slow, but she wasn't slow. She just saw letters differently, needed patience, individual attention. I worked with her every day after school. 6 months later, she read her A's full book, cried when she finished it. Margaret's voice filled with passion, with purpose, with the memory of who she'd been before loss redefined her. Teaching a child to read is like giving them keys to every door in the world. Watching a child realize they can do something they thought impossible. That moment of discovery. That's what I miss. That's what I loved. Samuel listened, captivated, seeing her come alive, seeing past the exhaustion and fear to the woman underneath. Capable, passionate, full of purpose that had been beaten down but never extinguished. You were good at it. I loved it. Every single day, even the hard days. Silence settled. Margaret's animation faded. Her face closed. But that life's gone. Samuel leaned forward. Maybe not. School board needs teachers come spring. Mrs. Henderson's retiring. You're qualified. Margaret's smile vanished. They wouldn't hire me, Mr. Morrison. Why not? You know why. Her voice went flat. I'm a poor widow living on a bachelor's ranch. My reputation is already ruined. No school board would hire someone like me. Your reputation is that you're a hard worker who minds her own business. My reputation is exactly what this town says it is. She met his eyes. You're kind to pretend otherwise, but we both know the truth. The truth is this town has judged you unfairly. Fair or not doesn't matter. What people believe becomes the truth. That's how reputation works. She stood, began clearing plates, hands steady but something broken in the set of her shoulders. Thank you for dinner, Mr. Morrison. And for the thought about teaching. But some doors close and don't reopen. She carried the dishes to the kitchen. Samuel sat alone at the table. Lamplight flickered against the walls. He'd hurt her. Not intentionally. But hope offered to someone who'd learned not to hope was its own kind of cruelty. He found her in the kitchen washing dishes with mechanical precision. Mrs. Fletcher. Margaret. She didn't turn. Yes, sir, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have suggested something that would cause you pain. You were being kind. I appreciate the thought. It's more than kindness. He stepped closer, not too close, respectful of space. It's waste. You have gifts. This town needs teachers. Children need someone who sees them the way you saw Emma Peterson. The town made its choice about me 2 years ago. Then the town is full of fools. She turned, looked at him, really looked, saw something in his face that made her breath catch. Why do you care, Mr. Morrison? I'm just your housekeeper. Because I know what it's like to waste chances, to let fear and pride and other people's judgments stop you from doing what matters. Samuel's voice went rough. I did it once. It cost my sister her life. I won't stand by and watch you bury your gifts because scared people need someone to look down on. Margaret's eyes filled. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you work hard. I know you're competent. I know you see people instead of looking through them. I know you deserve better than what life gave you. And I know that matters. That has to matter. She turned back to the dishes, hands shaking now, making ripples in the wash water. Samuel left, gave her space to compose herself. But something had shifted. Some wall had cracked. Not broken, not yet, but fractured enough to let light through. That night, Margaret sat in her cottage and cried again. Different tears than before. Not grief. Something else. Something that felt like being seen, like mattering, like maybe the world held more than judgment and survival. She didn't know what to do with that feeling. Didn't trust it. Trust was a luxury for people who hadn't lost in everything, but she held it anyway. Careful, tentative, like a coal that might warm you or burn you depending on how you carried it. In the main house, Samuel stood at his study window, watching the light in Margaret's cottage. Knowing he'd crossed a line, knowing there was no going back. He'd offered her a job. That was safe, defensible. But tonight he'd offered more, had seen her, had spoken to her pain, had suggested she mattered beyond her function. That was dangerous for both of them. The town was already watching, already whispering, already sharpening its judgment into weapons. But Samuel found he didn't care, or he cared and chose defiance anyway. He'd spent 5 years being careful, being safe, protecting his reputation and his ranch, and his standing while his sister died and his wife died, and every room in his house filled with ghosts. Careful had bought him nothing but loneliness. Maybe it was time to risk something. Maybe that's what second chances required. Risk, vulnerability, the courage to reach for connection even when connection could cost you everything. He looked at Catherine's Bible on his desk, the telegram beside it. He'd carried that guilt for 5 years, worn it like a hair shirt, used it to justify his isolation. But guilt that didn't lead to change was just self-indulgence, just another way of making tragedy about yourself instead of about doing better. Margaret Fletcher had lost everything, had been judged and found wanting by people who'd never known want, had survived 2 years of poverty and shame and exhaustion. And she was still kind, still capable, still willing to trust enough to walk up a stranger's road on Christmas morning with everything she owned in a single bag. That took courage Samuel could barely imagine. Courage that shamed his careful, controlled, protected existence. He couldn't give her back what she'd lost, couldn't restore her husband or her home or her reputation, but he could give her this: safety, stability, a place where her work was valued and her presence mattered. And if the town didn't like it, the town could answer to him. Samuel turned from the window, sat at his desk, pulled out paper and pen, began to write a letter to the school board, recommending Margaret Fletcher for the teaching position, listing her qualifications, her experience, her success with students, her character. He knew they'd ignore it, knew his recommendation would hurt more than help, knew he was probably making everything worse, but he wrote it anyway, because some things mattered more than outcomes. Some things you did because they were right even when right led nowhere but trouble. He sealed the letter, set it aside, would mail it tomorrow. Then he opened Catherine's Bible, read the inscription on the first page. To my dearest daughter Catherine on her 14th birthday, may you always seek wisdom and find grace. With love, Mother. Catherine had been 14, bright, curious, full of dreams. 10 years later, she died alone and terrified in a charity hospital because her brother had chosen land over love. Samuel couldn't change that, couldn't rewrite history, couldn't resurrect the dead or undo his failures. But he could learn from them, could choose differently this time, could be the person who stood up instead of stood by. He closed the Bible, extinguished the lamp, went to bed knowing sleep wouldn't come easy. It didn't. But for the first time in 5 years, his insomnia felt less like punishment and more like preparation, like his mind and heart were readying themselves for something difficult and necessary. Morning would come, the town would start its work. Judgment would sharpen into action, and Samuel Morrison would stand in the path of that judgment and dare it to go through him to get to the woman who'd walked up his road on Christmas morning with nothing but courage in a small cloth bag. Let them come. Let them whisper and scheme and threaten. He'd spent 5 years running from ghosts. Maybe it was time to face real enemies instead. Maybe that's what redemption looked like, not escape from consequence, but the courage to endure it, to stand firm, to protect what mattered even when protection cost you everything you'd spent your whole life building. Samuel closed his eyes, saw Margaret's face when she talked about teaching. Alive, purposeful, beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with features and everything to do with passion. He wanted to see that look again. Wanted to be the kind of man who created space for other people's gifts instead of demanding they shrink to fit his comfort. Wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, second chances came in pairs. One for the person you helped, one for yourself. Sleep finally came, light, troubled, but not empty, not anymore. In her cottage, Margaret Fletcher lay awake too, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Samuel Morrison's words. You deserve better than what life gave you. No one had said that to her in 2 years. No one had suggested she deserved anything but judgment and struggle and the slow grinding poverty of survival without dignity. Samuel Morrison barely knew her, had no reason to care about her teaching or her gifts or whether she lived or died or disappeared into the anonymous mass of women who'd lost everything and become invisible. But he'd seen her anyway, had spoken to her loss like it mattered, like she mattered, like the town's judgment was wrong and cruel, and beneath the kind of people they pretended to be. Margaret didn't know what to do with that, didn't know how to hold hope when hope had burned her so many times before, but she held it anyway, careful, tentative, afraid but willing. Because what else was there? Cynicism, despair, the slow death of giving up. And he survived 2 years by refusing to give up, by scrubbing floors and mending clothes and teaching children in secret, by putting one foot in front of the other even when every step hurt. Maybe this was just another step. Maybe Samuel Morrison was just another person who'd disappoint her. Maybe hope was foolish and trust was naive and caring about anything was just setting yourself up for pain. But maybe not. Maybe sometimes you got lucky. Maybe sometimes people meant what they said. Maybe sometimes second chances were real. Margaret closed her eyes, said a prayer. Not for rescue. She'd learned rescue didn't come, but for strength, for courage, for the ability to keep moving forward even when forward led through fire, and for protection, for Samuel Morrison, who'd offered kindness when kindness could destroy him, who'd given her a home when homes were supposed to be earned through spotless reputation and unwavering adherence to society's rules. He didn't know what was coming, the storm that was building, the town's wrath when it finally turned its attention to the widow Fletcher and the wealthy rancher foolish enough to shelter her. But Margaret knew, had been through this before, knew how quickly the whispers became accusations, how fast judgment hardened into action, how viciously good people could turn when threatened by someone else's refusal to accept the role society had assigned them. It was coming, the confrontation, the ultimatum. The moment when Samuel would have to choose between his reputation and his conscience. Margaret just hoped he'd choose his reputation, hoped he'd send her away before the town destroyed everything he'd built, hoped she'd have the strength to leave before her presence cost him too much, because she couldn't let another good man be ruined by her existence. Couldn't be the reason someone else lost everything. Not again, not even for a warm cottage and fresh bread and the first genuine kindness she'd known in 2 years. Some gifts cost too much. Some kindness hurt more than cruelty. Some second chances came with prices neither party could afford to pay. Morning would reveal which kind this was. Morning came cold and bright. Samuel found Margaret in the kitchen, breakfast already made. Coffee hot, eggs perfect, biscuits golden. They ate in comfortable silence. Almost comfortable. Something hummed beneath the quiet. Anticipation, maybe, or dread. The sense of storm clouds gathering just beyond the horizon. Samuel finished his coffee, stood. "Mrs. Fletcher, I'm going into town this morning. Mercantile and bank, would you accompany me? We'll need supplies before the next snow." Margaret's hand stilled on her cup. "Town, if you're uncomfortable, I understand, but you shouldn't be a prisoner here, and I could use your judgment on household supplies." She wanted to refuse. Knew going to town with Samuel Morrison was asking for trouble, was painting a target on both their backs, was giving the gossips exactly the ammunition they craved. But she also heard what he wasn't saying, that hiding felt like shame, that shame felt like agreement with the judgment, that the only way to fight whispers was to walk straight back into the light and dare people to say their accusations to your face. "I'll need 10 minutes to make myself presentable." "Take your time." 30 minutes later, they rode into Cedar Ridge, Samuel driving the wagon. Margaret beside him, her new wool coat buttoned against the cold, her chin up despite her racing heart. The town was small, 800 people, one main street, mercantile, bank, church, saloon, blacksmith, doctor's office, boarding houses and family homes spreading out from the center like ripples. Everyone knew everyone. Everyone watched everyone. Privacy was a luxury of cities. In Cedar Ridge, your business was everybody's business. Your mistakes became their entertainment. Your tragedies, their cautionary tales. Samuel pulled up in front of the mercantile, helped Margaret down. Every head on the street turned. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Women clustered together, whispering behind gloved hands. Samuel offered Margaret his arm. "Shall we?" She took it. Let him lead her into the mercantile with the entire town watching. Inside, Mr. Peterson stood behind the counter. His wife Ellen sorted fabric in the corner. Both looked up when Samuel and Margaret entered. Both froze. "Mr. Morrison," Peterson's voice was carefully neutral. "What can I do for you today? Need supplies." Samuel pulled out a list. Flour, sugar, coffee, salt, baking powder. "Whatever Mrs. Fletcher thinks we need for the household." "Mrs. Fletcher," Peterson's eyes cut to Margaret. Didn't quite meet hers. Looked past her. Through her. Ma'am. Margaret's spine stiffened, but her voice stayed level. Good morning, Mr. Peterson. Mrs. Peterson. Ellen Peterson turned away. Didn't respond. Just stared at the fabric like it held the secrets of the universe. Samuel saw it. The deliberate cut. The weaponized silence. His jaw tightened. They gathered supplies. Margaret chose carefully. Practical items. Nothing extravagant. Samuel added things she didn't ask for. Good coffee, real butter, sugar for baking. At the counter, Peterson tallied the order without speaking, without looking at Margaret, like she wasn't there, like she didn't exist. That'll be $18, Mr. Morrison. Samuel paid. Added to my account. As they loaded the wagon, three women crossed the street. Mrs. Harriet Whitmore led them, 50 years old, sharp-featured, sharp-tongued, wife of the head deacon, leader of the Church Ladies' Auxiliary, arbiter of Cedar Ridge's social conscience. She planted herself directly in their path. Mr. Morrison, her voice could cut glass. A word, if you please. Samuel set down the flour sack. Mrs. Whitmore. Tongues are wagging Samuel. Her eyes flicked to Margaret. Dismissed her. Returned to Samuel. A widow alone on your ranch, living on your property. It isn't proper. You must know that. Mrs. Fletcher is my housekeeper. Her work is impeccable. I'm sure it is. Whitmore's smile was poison pretending to be medicine. But appearances matter. Surely you understand. A woman of her circumstances, living under your roof, people talk. Let them talk. You must think of your standing, your business relationships. What will your partners say? My partners care about my word and my cattle, not my household arrangements. Whitmore's smile vanished. This is precisely the sort of arrogance that leads good men astray. You're being foolish, Samuel. Willfully blind. I'm being kind. There's a difference. Kindness that compromises virtue is not kindness. It's weakness. Samuel picked up the flour sack, loaded it into the wagon. When he turned back, his voice was quiet. Cold. The kind of cold that cut deeper than shouting. Mrs. Whitmore, with all due respect, my household is my concern. Mrs. Fletcher works hard, conducts herself with dignity, asks for nothing she hasn't earned. If you or anyone else has a problem with that, you're welcome to discuss it with me. Privately, not on a public street where your goal is shame rather than resolution. Whitmore's face flushed. Well, I see where you stand. I do stand, ma'am. The question is, where do you... He helped Margaret into the wagon, climbed up beside her, snapped the reins. The horse moved forward. Behind them, Whitmore watched them go. Her expression promised retribution. Promised consequences. Promised that this conversation was just the beginning. Margaret sat rigid beside Samuel. Didn't speak until they were outside town. You shouldn't have done that. Done what defended me. She turned to face him. Mrs. Whitmore has influence. Her husband is head deacon. They can make your life very difficult. They can try. This isn't a joke, Mr. Morrison. These people can destroy you, only if I let them. You don't understand. Her voice rose. Panic edged the words. I've been through this. I know how it works. First the whispers, then the social exclusion, then the business pressure. Your contracts will dry up. Your partners will distance themselves. The bank will call your loans. Everything you've built will crumble. Then I'll build something else. You'll lose everything. Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop. Turned to face her fully. Mrs. Fletcher, Margaret, I've already lost everything that mattered. My wife, my sister. Years of my life spent protecting a reputation that meant nothing when I was alone in an empty house. His voice gentled. You think I'm afraid of Mrs. Whitmore? I'm terrified. But not of her. I'm terrified of waking up in 5 years and realizing I chose comfort over courage again. That I let another person suffer because I was too afraid of consequences. I don't want to be the reason you suffer. You're not. My choices are my own. My consequences are mine to carry. They sat in silence. Cold wind cut across the open land. Montana stretched endless in every direction. Finally, Margaret spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Why Samuel didn't pretend not to understand. Because 5 years ago, my sister Catherine needed help. She was alone, scared, pregnant. She sent me a telegram begging me to come. I was closing a land deal, $12,000. The biggest opportunity of my life. I told myself I'd go see her after. He pulled the old telegram from his pocket. Always carried it, always would. She died 3 days later, her and her baby both, alone in a charity hospital because her brother was too important, too busy, too concerned with his reputation to save her. Margaret's eyes filled. I can't bring Catherine back. Can't undo what I did or what I failed to do, but I can try to be different. Try to choose right this time. Try to be the kind of man who doesn't let good people suffer just because helping them is inconvenient or costly. He looked at her directly. You walked up my road on Christmas morning with everything you owned in a cloth bag. You chose to trust me. The least I can do is be worthy of that trust, even if it cost you everything, especially then. Margaret cried, silent tears that froze on her cheeks before they could fall. Samuel handed her his handkerchief, said nothing. Let her feel what she needed to feel. When she composed herself, she handed back the handkerchief. Thank you for what? For being foolish enough to do the right thing. He smiled, actually smiled. First real smile she'd seen from him. Foolishness is underrated. They rode back to the ranch in silence. But something had shifted. Some wall had come down. Not all the way, but enough. Enough to let understanding through. Enough to transform employer and employee into something closer to allies. The storm was coming. They both knew it now. Whitmore would move against them, would use every weapon in her considerable arsenal. Would rally the church and the business leaders and the respectable families. Would make Samuel choose between his reputation and his conscience. But they'd face it together. Not alone. And that made all the difference. That night, Samuel sat in his study, wrote another letter, this one to his largest business partner, James Carver. The man who'd been in that Helena office 5 years ago when Samuel chose land over blood. The letter explained the situation, acknowledged the coming controversy, made it clear that Samuel would understand if Carver needed to distance himself. Business was business, reputation mattered, but it also made clear that Samuel wasn't backing down, wasn't sending Margaret away, wasn't choosing the easy path just because the hard path led through fire. He sealed the letter, set it aside, knew the response wouldn't be good, knew Carver would pull out, knew other partners would follow, but knowing and accepting were different things. And Samuel had spent 5 years knowing what he should do without having the courage to do it. Not this time. This time knowing led to action. This time courage won over fear. This time he'd stand firm no matter what it cost. In her cottage, Margaret packed her bag again because she knew what was coming. Knew the pressure would build until Samuel had no choice but to send her away. Knew her presence would destroy him if she stayed. But she'd give him time to come to that realization himself. Would work hard, prove her value, make it as difficult as possible for him to choose reputation over her. And when the moment came when he told her to leave, she'd go with grace, would thank him for the kindness, would carry the memory of these weeks as proof that goodness still existed somewhere in the world. But she wouldn't go easily, wouldn't make it simple, would fight for this chance with everything she had, because second chances were rare. And this one mattered in ways she couldn't quite name, but felt in her bones. Morning would come. And with it, the next step in a dance neither of them had choreographed, but both were learning as they went. A dance that would either save them both or destroy them utterly. Time would tell which. But for tonight, they'd rest, in separate spaces, under separate roofs, but united by something fragile and fierce and worth protecting. Hope, the kind that survives because you choose to feed it even when feeding it feels like setting yourself on fire. The kind that changes everything, if you're brave enough to let it. February came to Montana territory like an executioner, cold and merciless. The kind of cold that found every crack in every wall and turned breath to ice before it left your lungs. Samuel Morrison stood in his barn checking the pregnant mare. She was close now. Maybe tonight. Maybe tomorrow. The foal kicked strong against his palm, life persisting despite the brutal world waiting to receive it. Jake Patterson appeared in the doorway, snow dusting his shoulders. His face was grim. "Boss, we got trouble." Samuel didn't look up. What kind? The kind that's been building since you brought Mrs. Fletcher here. Jake stepped closer, dropped his voice even though they were alone. Reverend Boz preached about moral standards this morning. Didn't name names. Didn't have to. Whole congregation knew who he meant. Samuel's hand stilled on the mayor's flank. And Deacon Walsh stopped me after service. Said the church board wants to meet with you. Tomorrow afternoon, said it's urgent. I'll bet it is. Jake shifted his weight. There's more. Henry Caldwell at the bank. He pulled me aside. Said your loan renewal in March might face complications. Board's concerned about your judgment, your associations. Samuel straightened, looked at Jake directly. How many contracts have we lost? 3 so far. Jake pulled out a list. James Carver pulled the timber deal, $8,000. Daniel Preston canceled the cattle sale to Billings, $5,000. Fort Supply contract went to the Hendersons instead, $2,000. Total $15,000 in lost revenue. Samuel absorbed this, $15,000, nearly half his annual income. The kind of loss that could cripple a ranch. Forced selling land, laying off hands, everything he'd built for 15 years bleeding away because he'd chosen compassion over commerce. The men most are loyal. Jake's voice was firm. Miller, Chen Rodriguez, young Tommy. They're with you all the way, but Thompson, Wade, and Billy quit. Their wives insisted, said they wouldn't have their men working for someone of questionable morals, so we're down to 11 hands. 10. Martinez's wife is pushing him to leave too. Samuel nodded slowly, walked to the barn door, looked out at his ranch. 7,000 acres, 1,200 head of cattle, buildings and fences and hay stores and everything that made this place work. All of it balanced on the edge of a knife because he'd given a desperate woman shelter on Christmas morning. He thought about Catherine, about the choice he'd made 5 years ago. Money over mercy, reputation over redemption. He'd gained $12,000 and 5,000 acres. He'd lost his soul. Not this time. His voice was quiet but absolute. Tell Martinez his job is secure whether he stays or goes. Tell the others I appreciate their loyalty. And tell anyone who asks that Mrs. Fletcher isn't going anywhere. Jake smiled. Figured you'd say that. Just wanted you to know what you're up against. I know, but thanks for the warning. Jake left. Samuel stood alone in the cold. $15,000, 3 workers, a loan renewal in jeopardy, the church board circling like wolves, Mrs. Whitmore sharpening her knives, and Margaret Fletcher in the guest cottage scrubbing his floors and mending his shirts and making his empty house feel like home for the first time in 7 years. Worth it. All of it worth it. He walked back to the house. Found Margaret in the kitchen kneading bread. Her hands worked the dough with practiced efficiency. Flour dusted her apron. A smudge marked her cheek where she'd pushed back her hair. She looked up when he entered. Smiled. Small but genuine. Mr. Morrison, dinner will be ready at 6. Pot roast and vegetables. Thank you. He poured coffee, stood by the window, watching snow fall. Margaret worked in silence, but she felt the tension radiating off him like heat from a stove. Something had happened. Something bad. Mr. Morrison. She wiped her hands on her apron. Is everything all right? He turned, studied her, flour in her hair, exhaustion around her eyes despite the smile, working herself to the bone trying to justify his faith in her, trying to be worth the cost he was paying. No, he set down his coffee. Everything is not all right, but it will be. What happened? Samuel told her. All of it. The lost contracts, the departing workers, the church board meeting tomorrow. The loan complications. $15,000 and counting. Margaret's face went white. She sat down hard on a kitchen chair. You need to send me away. No, Mr. Morrison, her voice shook. You've lost $15,000. In 6 weeks, because of me, because you were kind to me, you'll lose everything if I stay. Then I'll lose everything. You can't mean that. I've never meant anything more in my life. She stood, paced, hands twisting together. This is exactly what I was afraid of. Exactly what I warned you about. Mrs. Whitmore won't stop. The church won't stop. They'll bleed you dry until you have nothing left. Samuel crossed the kitchen, stood in front of her, not touching, just close enough that she had to look at him. Mrs. Fletcher, Margaret, listen to me. I'm a wealthy man. I own 7,000 acres. I have money in 3 banks. I have cattle and buildings and assets. I can afford to lose $15,000. I can afford to lose 30,000. His voice gentled. What I can afford, what I won't afford, is losing my humanity. Again. I did that once. Chose money over mercy. Let my sister die while I protected my precious reputation. I've lived with that guilt for 5 years. It's destroyed everything good in me. You're giving me a chance to be different, to choose right, to be the kind of man who doesn't sacrifice people to protect profits. Don't take that from me, please. Margaret's eyes filled. But your ranch, your workers, everything you've built can be rebuilt. Samuel's voice was fierce. But my sister can't be resurrected. My integrity can't be recovered once I've sold it. Some things matter more than money. I learned that too late to save Catherine, but not too late to save myself. She broke, completely, sank back into the chair and cried. Deep, wrenching sobs that bent her double. All the fear and shame and guilt she'd been carrying, all the weight of knowing her presence was costing him everything. All the impossible burden of being saved at someone else's expense. Samuel let her cry. Didn't try to comfort, didn't touch, just stood there. Present, solid, a wall against the storm. When she finally quieted, he handed her his handkerchief. The same one from before. Never washed, still stained with her tears. I'm sorry. She wiped her face. I shouldn't. You should. Samuel pulled out a chair, sat across from her. You've been carrying this alone for too long. The guilt, the shame, the weight of other people's judgment. It's time to set it down. I don't know how, neither do I, but we'll figure it out together. They sat in silence, the bread dough rising on the counter, coffee growing cold, snow falling outside like the world ending or beginning. Hard to tell which. Finally, Margaret spoke. What will you tell the church board the truth? That you work for me, that you're competent and honest and deserve better than what this town has given you. That if they have a problem with that, they can take it up with God. She almost smiled. That'll go over well. Probably not, but I've spent 5 years worrying about how things go over. I'm tired of it. They finished preparing dinner together, working in comfortable silence. Margaret rolling out biscuits, Samuel peeling potatoes. Domestic tasks that felt like defiance, like building something normal in the face of a world determined to tear them apart. At 6 o'clock, they sat down to eat. Pot roast and vegetables and fresh bread. Simple food, but it tasted like resistance, like hope, like two people refusing to accept the roles society had assigned them. Tomorrow the church board would have their say. Tomorrow the pressure would intensify. Tomorrow everything might fall apart. But tonight they'd eat together, in a warm kitchen, with snow falling outside and a fire burning inside, and something fragile growing between them that neither would name but both recognized. Something worth fighting for, worth losing everything for. Tomorrow could bring what it would. Tonight was theirs. The church sat at the center of Cedar Ridge like a judge on a bench, white clapboard, tall steeple, windows that caught afternoon light and threw it back like accusations. Samuel Morrison climbed the steps at 2 o'clock. The church board meeting. His summons, his trial. Reverend Jonathan Hayes met him at the door, 52 years old, kind eyes, weak spine, a good man corrupted by the need to keep peace instead of make it. Samuel, thank you for coming. The board is assembled in the meeting room. Reverend. Hayes led him through the sanctuary, past pews where Samuel had sat every Sunday for 15 years, past the pulpit where he'd heard sermons about mercy and grace and loving your neighbor. All of it beautiful in theory, brutal in practice. The meeting room was small, a table, 6 chairs, 5 occupied, Deacon Richard Walsh at the head, Mrs. Harriet Whitmore to his right, 3 other board members Samuel knew by sight but not well. Merchants, property owners, respectable people with respectable lives and respectability to protect. Samuel, Walsh gestured to the empty chair. Please, sit. Samuel remained standing. I'll stand, thank you. Suit yourself. Walsh folded his hands on the table. You know why you're here. I have an idea. We're concerned. Walsh's voice was careful, measured, about your situation with Mrs. Fletcher, a widow living on your property. The appearance of impropriety, it's causing talk. Let it cause talk. Mrs. Whitmore leaned forward. This isn't just gossip, Samuel. It's affecting you, your business. You are standing in this community. James Carver pulled out of your timber contract. We've heard others are considering the same. That's their choice. It's your choice that's forcing them to choose. Whitmore's voice sharpened. You're putting everyone in an impossible position. Your partners, your workers, this church, all because you insist on harboring a woman of questionable reputation. Questionable according to whom? According to everyone. Whitmore's face was hard. She's poor. She's alone. Her husband left debts. She scrubs floors for money. She's precisely the kind of woman a respectable man doesn't associate with. She's precisely the kind of woman Jesus associated with. Samuel's voice cut like a blade. Widows, the poor, the judged and condemned. Seems to me our Lord spent most of his time with people respectable folks wouldn't touch. Don't you dare use scripture to justify sin. What sin? Samuel stepped forward, placed both hands on the table, leaned in. What exactly has Mrs. Fletcher done that warrants your condemnation? She lost her husband, got saddled with his debts, worked herself to the bone trying to survive. Where's the sin in that silence? Or is the sin that she exists, that she reminds you comfortable people, that tragedy doesn't care about virtue, that good people can fall through no fault of their own, that maybe, just maybe, your prosperity has more to do with luck than righteousness, Samuel? Walsh's voice held warning. We're trying to help you. By demanding I throw a desperate woman out into the snow, that's help by asking you to be sensible. Walsh spread his hands. Either dismiss her or marry her. Make the situation proper. But this middle ground helps no one. Marry her, Samuel straightened. That's your solution. Force marriage or force her out. It's not about force. It's about maintaining standards. Whitmore's voice was ice. This community has rules. Social contracts. You're breaking them. There are consequences. Let me be clear. Samuel's voice dropped. Quiet. Dangerous. Mrs. Fletcher is my employee. She works hard, conducts herself with dignity, asks for nothing she hasn't earned. She will remain in my employ as long as she chooses. If you or anyone else has a problem with that, you're welcome to take it up with me. Privately, not through gossip and financial pressure and moral blackmail. We're offering you a choice. Walsh stood. Marry her and make it respectable. Dismiss her and restore your reputation. Or face the consequences of your stubbornness. The board will make decisions about your involvement in this church. Your business relationships will suffer. The bank will reconsider your loans. Samuel looked at each of them in turn, saw fear in their eyes, not of him, fear of difference, fear of someone choosing compassion over conformity, fear that if he got away with it, others might follow. The whole careful structure of judgment and social control might crumble. He understood then. This wasn't about Margaret Fletcher. This was about power, about who got to decide what was acceptable, about keeping everyone in line through fear of exclusion. His voice when he spoke was calm. You're asking me to choose between my conscience and your approval, between doing what's right and doing what's comfortable, between being the man I want to be and being the man you demand I be. He turned toward the door. That's not a choice, that's a test. And I know which side I'm on. You have until Sunday, February 25th. Walsh's voice followed him. 3 weeks. Marry her or dismiss her, or we'll take action. Samuel didn't respond, didn't turn back, just walked out of the church into cold afternoon light that felt like freedom. He rode home slowly, let the horse set the pace, thought about Catherine, about choices and consequences, about the kind of man he wanted to be versus the kind of man he'd been. The ranch appeared ahead, smoke rising from the cottage chimney, lamplight already glowing in the main house even though dusk was hours away. Margaret keeping things warm and bright, making his house a home through 1,000 small acts of care. He found her in the kitchen. She looked up when he entered. Read his face. It didn't go well. It went exactly as expected. Samuel hung his coat, poured coffee, told her everything, the ultimatum, the 3-week deadline. Marry her or dismiss her or face the consequences. Margaret's hands stilled in the dishwater. They want you to marry me or fire you. Either way, they want the problem solved. She dried her hands on her apron, slowly, carefully. I should go, tonight, before this gets worse. No, Mr. Morrison. Samuel. My name is Samuel, and you're not going anywhere unless you want to. She turned to face him. What I want doesn't matter. What matters is that they're destroying you. Week by week, dollar by dollar. They won't stop until you have nothing left. Then I'll have nothing left. Samuel set down his coffee, walked to where she stood. Mrs. Fletcher, Margaret, I need you to understand something. 5 years ago, I had everything: money, land, reputation, respect. I had it all. And I was empty, hollow, dead inside except for the guilt eating me alive. He paused. You've given me something worth more than all of that. Purpose, a reason to be better, a chance to choose right instead of easy. Don't ask me to throw that away to protect assets I don't actually care about. I can't let you sacrifice everything for me. It's not sacrifice if I'm gaining something better. She looked at him, really looked, saw something in his face that made her breath catch. What are you saying I'm saying? Samuel stopped, started again. I'm saying that 3 weeks from now, I'll stand in front of that church board and tell them exactly what I told you. That you're staying, that they can do their worst, and that I don't give a damn about their approval anymore. And if they make good on their threats, then we'll deal with it. Together. Together. Margaret tested the word, like it was foreign, like she'd forgotten what it meant. If you'll let me, Samuel's voice gentled, if you'll trust me to stand with you instead of against you, if you'll believe that some things matter more than money or reputation or what scared people think. She wanted to say yes, wanted to believe him. But belief was expensive, trust was dangerous. Hope could kill you if you held it wrong. I need to think. Take all the time you need. She went to the cottage, sat by the fire, stared into flames and tried to sort truth from fantasy. Samuel Morrison was offering to destroy himself to protect her, to stand against his church and his community and his entire world. For her, for a widow with nothing to offer but gratitude and the ability to make good biscuits. It was insane, noble and beautiful and completely insane. And she wanted to say yes, wanted to believe they could survive this, wanted to trust that courage was enough and love could conquer, and all the fairy tale lies she'd stopped believing 2 years ago when Robert died and the debts came due and the town showed its true face. But wanting wasn't enough. Belief didn't change reality. Hope didn't stop bullets or bankruptcy or the slow grinding destruction of a good man's life. She had to leave, had to protect him from his own goodness, had to walk away before he lost everything that mattered. Margaret packed her bag, this time for real. She'd leave in the morning, before Samuel could stop her, before her weakness betrayed his strength. It was the only way, the only choice that made sense, even if it broke her heart to make it. Samuel stood at his study window, watching lamplight in the cottage, knowing what she was thinking, knowing she was probably packing right now, planning to run because she thought running would save him. He couldn't let her go, wouldn't, not because he needed a housekeeper, but because somewhere in the last 6 weeks Margaret Fletcher had become essential. Her presence, her strength, her quiet dignity in the face of cruelty. He loved her. The realization hit him like a fist to the chest. He loved her, not as an employer, not as charity, as a man loves a woman, completely, irrevocably, in ways that terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. When had it happened? When she'd quoted Emerson over dinner, when he'd heard her play piano, when he'd watched her hands knead bread with the same care she brought to everything, or maybe that first night in the stable, when he'd seen Catherine's ghost in her face and something in him had recognized something in her. Kindred, broken, still trying despite everything. He couldn't tell her. Not now, not while she was planning to leave, not while confession might feel like manipulation, not while she was barely holding herself together. But he could show her, could stand firm, could prove through action that his promises weren't empty, that he meant what he said, that she was worth every dollar and every friendship and every scrap of reputation he'd lose. Tomorrow she'd try to leave. He'd stop her. Not through force, through truth, through the kind of honesty that stripped away all pretense and left only what mattered. And if she still chose to go, he'd let her, would help her pack, would help, would give her money and references and anything she needed to survive. But he'd make damn sure she knew that she mattered, knew that she was wanted, Knew that someone in this cold world thought she was worth fighting for, even if that fight cost him everyone. Morning came gray and cold. Margaret woke early, dressed in her traveling clothes, such as they were, the same threadbare dress she'd worn on Christmas, the coat Samuel had given her. She'd leave that, couldn't take his gifts, couldn't carry reminders of kindness she didn't deserve. She picked up her bag, looked around the cottage one last time. 2 months of warmth and safety, and the closest thing to peace she'd known in 2 years. Over now. Time to go back to boarding houses and scrubbing floors in the slow grind of survival. She stepped outside, dawn breaking, pink light touching the mountains. Samuel sat on her porch steps, coat pulled tight, rifle across his lap. He'd been there all night. Margaret stopped. Mr. Morrison. Samuel. He didn't stand, didn't move, just looked at her, at the bag in her hand. Were you planning to say goodbye? She couldn't speak, couldn't explain, couldn't justify running when he'd offered to stand. Margaret, his voice was infinitely gentle. Please don't go. I have to. She set down the bag, wrapped her arms around herself. I can't watch them destroy you. Can't be the reason you lose everything. I've been the reason people lost things before. I won't do it again. You're not the reason. They are. Their fear, their cruelty, their need to feel superior by stepping on people already down. Don't give them that power. Don't let them win by making you believe their judgment is your fault. She shook her head. You don't understand. This is what happens. This is always what happens. People are kind at first, then the cost becomes clear. Then they change their minds. Better to leave now before you hate me for staying. I could never hate you, you don't know that. Samuel stood, set the rifle aside, walked to where she stood trembling in the dawn cold. You're right, I don't know the future. Don't know how this ends. Don't know if we'll survive or crash and burn. But I know this, his voice dropped. Intimate, just for her. I know that you matter. Know that your life has value beyond what you can do for other people. Know that you deserve better than a world that judges you for surviving tragedy. He paused. I know that I'm a better man with you here than without you. Know that this empty house feels like home when you're in it. Know that I laugh more, hope more, feel more alive than I have in 5 years. Margaret's eyes filled. I know one more thing. Samuel reached out, took her hand gently, giving her every chance to pull away. I know that I love you, not as charity, not as penance, as a man loves a woman, completely, terrifyingly, in ways I didn't think I'd ever feel again. She couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Love, he'd said love. You don't have to say it back. You don't have to feel the same. But I needed you to know before you left. Needed you to understand that you're not alone. That someone sees you, all of you, the broken parts and the strong parts and everything in between, and loves you anyway. She tried to speak, failed, tried again. I'm afraid, I know. So am I. If I stay, if we do this, they'll destroy you. Everything you've built, everything you are. Then let them. Samuel pulled her closer, not quite touching, but close enough to feel his warmth. Let them take the money and the reputation and the business. Let them have it all, as long as I have you, as long as we face it together. That's enough. How can you say that? How can you risk everything for someone like me because you're not someone like you? You're Margaret Fletcher, the woman who walked up my road on Christmas with nothing but courage, the woman who makes my house feel like home, the woman who deserves so much better than what life has given her. His voice broke. Because I failed my sister. Let her die alone. And I can't. I won't. Fail you too. Margaret broke. All the walls she'd built, all the armor she'd worn, all the careful distance she'd maintained to protect them both. It crumbled. She stepped into his arms. Let him hold her. Let herself be held. For the first time in 2 years, maybe longer. Let herself believe that maybe. Just maybe. Someone could love her, broken and poor and judged and all. They stood in the dawn, holding each other, while the world came awake around them and prepared to tear them apart. After a long time, Margaret pulled back, looked up at him. Her face was wet. His was too. Samuel Morrison. Her voice was steady, stronger than she felt. If you're asking what I think you're asking, the answer is yes. Not to save you, not to make the church happy, because you're the first person in 2 years to see me as human instead of problem. Because you make me believe I might deserve good things because I love you too, even though it terrifies me, even though we're probably both insane. Samuel smiled, actual smile, the kind that transformed his entire face. We're definitely both insane. So what do? We get married, Samuel said it simply, like it was obvious, like it was the only choice that made sense. We stand in front of that church, in front of everyone who's judged us, and we choose each other. Publicly, permanently. We dare them to say our love isn't legitimate. When Sunday, February 25th, the day of their deadline, will give them exactly what they demanded. A wedding, just not the quiet, ashamed ceremony they expected. He looked fierce and beautiful and utterly convinced. We'll marry in that church, at regular service time, invite the whole town, make them watch, make them choose whether to celebrate or condemn, make them reveal who they really are. Margaret laughed, half sob, half disbelief. You want to force the town to witness our wedding. I want to stop hiding. Stop letting them make us feel like we're doing something wrong. We're not. We're surviving. We're choosing each other. We're building something good in the face of their cruelty. That deserves to be celebrated, deserves to be seen. She thought about it, saw the brilliance, the defiance, the way it turned their ultimatum into their declaration, took the church's weapon and made it their banner. All right, she squeezed his hand. Let's do it. Let's get married in front of Combe and the town and everyone who tried to tear us apart. Let's show them what courage looks like. Samuel kissed her forehead, gentle, reverent, like she was precious, like she mattered. They stood on the porch as full light broke, the cottage behind them, the ranch spreading around them. 3 weeks until the wedding. 3 weeks to prepare. 3 weeks for the town to sharpen its knives. But they'd face it together, not alone, and that made all the difference. The 3 weeks between engagement and wedding passed like seasons compressed into moments. Time moves strange when you stood at the edge of everything changing. Samuel lost 2 more contracts. The Henderson brothers pulled their hay supply agreement, worth $3,000. Marcus Reed canceled a cattle partnership that would have netted $5,000 come spring. Total losses now exceeded $20,000. Nearly half his annual revenue gone because he'd chosen love over commerce. Jake brought the news on a Tuesday morning. Samuel was in the barn checking the pregnant mare. She'd finally foaled 3 days prior. A strong colt with good legs. Life persisting. Boss, Jake's voice was careful. Reed pulled out. Sent word this morning. Samuel nodded. Expected. That makes 5 contracts. 23,000 total. I can count Jake. Martinez left yesterday. Wife gave him no choice. Down to 9 hands then. 8. Chen's wife is making noise. Samuel straightened. Looked at his foreman, his friend. You thinking about leaving too? Jake snorted. Hell no. Sarah thinks you're doing the right thing. So do I. Besides, somebody's got to keep this place running when you're off being noble. Samuel almost smiled. Appreciated. But boss, Jake's face went serious. The bank. Caldwell sent a letter. They're calling your loan. All 8,000, due March 1st. The wedding's February 25th. I know, Jake pulled out the letter. Read it. They're citing risk factors, moral turpitude clause. Says your judgment's compromised. Samuel took the letter. Read it himself. Legal language wrapped around cruelty. The bank wanted their money back before he lost everything. Before there was nothing left to collect. Can you pay it? Maybe, if I sell the North Quarter. 2,000 acres. The land you just bought 3 years ago. The land I bought with money I should have used to save Catherine. Samuel folded the letter, put it in his pocket. Seems fitting I lose it choosing different this time. Jake said nothing. Sometimes silence was the only appropriate response. That same week, Margaret discovered her secret teaching had been discovered. She'd been meeting 7 children in the old Miller barn on the edge of town. Orphans mostly, children too poor for regular school. She taught them reading and arithmetic 3 afternoons a week. Asked nothing. Just gave them what they'd been denied. On Wednesday afternoon, she arrived at the barn to find Mrs. Whitmore waiting. With the sheriff, Mrs. Fletcher. Whitmore's voice was poison. Teaching without a license is illegal in Montana territory. I'm not charging money. You are operating an unauthorized school. Sheriff Taggart has been instructed to shut it down. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Ma'am, I don't want trouble. But the law's the law. You'll need to stop. Margaret looked at the 7 children clustered behind her, scared, already learning that kindness could be punished, that the world would take even this small grace away. These children have nowhere else to go. Then perhaps their parents should have made better choices. Whitmore's smile was sharp. Actions have consequences, Mrs. Fletcher. You of all people should understand that. Margaret wanted to argue, wanted to fight, but the sheriff's face said it was pointless. The law was the law, and the law served those who made it. Fine. She turned to the children. I'm sorry, we'll have to stop for now. Forever, Mrs. Whitmore corrected. Unless you want charges filed. Margaret gathered her books, hugged each child, promised them nothing because promises felt like lies when the world could take everything away. That evening, she told Samuel. He listened, face hard. When she finished, he stood, put on his coat. Where are you going? To talk to the school board. Samuel, they won't listen. Maybe not, but they'll hear me. He rode into town, found Marcus Henderson, board president, closing his store. Henderson, need a word, Marcus. Henderson's face was guarded. Heard about the teaching situation. You shut her down. We enforce territorial law. Teaching requires certification. She was helping children nobody else would teach. The law doesn't make exceptions for good intentions. Samuel stepped a bit closer. Not threatening, just present. Those children need education. Mrs. Fletcher was providing it for free, asking nothing. And you stopped her because she's associated with me. Henderson looked away. You're making a lot of people uncomfortable, Samuel. Good. Comfortable people don't change. Comfortable people maintain systems that crush those beneath them. This isn't about systems. It's about propriety. It's about power, about who gets to decide who matters. Those children you denied education to, they're poor. They're orphaned. They don't matter to you because mattering is reserved for people with property and position. That's not fair. Isn't it? Samuel's voice dropped. You've never had to scrub floors for coins, never had to choose between food and shelter, never had to survive a world determined to break you. Those children are living that. Margaret was giving them a way out, and you took it away to punish me through her. Henderson shifted, uncomfortable. The law is the law. Then the law is wrong. Samuel turned to leave. Stopped. When you see those children begging on the street in 5 years, remember you could have stopped it. Remember you chose rules over compassion. I hope that brings you comfort. He rode home. Margaret was waiting on the porch. How did it go? About as well as expected. She took his hand. Thank you for trying. I'm not done trying. Samuel looked at her. If the school board won't let you teach, we'll create our own school. On the ranch, outside their jurisdiction. Anyone who wants to learn can come. Free of charge. You do that. We do that. Together. After we're married. After we've shown this town that they don't get to decide how we live. Margaret kissed him. First time since the dawn confession. Quick and soft and full of promise. 1 more week, she whispered. 1 more week, he agreed. Mrs. Abigail Doyle made her allegiance clear on the Monday before the wedding. She arrived at Morrison Ranch in her buggy driven by her grandson, 87 years old and sharp as a blade. She'd been the grand dame of Cedar Ridge for 40 years, widowed young, raised 4 children alone, built a life through determination and refusal to accept limits. Samuel met her at the door. Mrs. Doyle, this is unexpected. Should have come sooner. She climbed down with her grandson's help. But old age makes you slow, physically if not mentally. Would you like coffee? I'd like to meet the woman everyone's talking about. Samuel led her inside, found Margaret in the kitchen, introduced them. Mrs. Doyle studied Margaret with eyes that missed nothing. You're younger than I expected. Prettier too. The town said you were haggard. The town says many things, most of them lies. Doyle sat at the kitchen table, uninvited but unconcerned. Tell me about your teaching. Margaret poured coffee, told her about the 7 children. about the barn school shut down, about wanting to give orphans and poor children the education they deserved. Doyle listened, nodded. When Margaret finished, the old woman smiled. You remind me of myself at your age. Stubborn, competent, refusing to accept that the world gets to tell you who you are. She turned to Samuel. I approve. I wasn't asking for approval. Good, because you wouldn't have gotten it if you were. Approval sought is weakness. Approval offered freely is gift. She sipped her coffee. I'll be at your wedding, front row, and I'll bring 15 families with me. People who remember what it's like to need help instead of judge those who do. Why would you do that? Because 40 years ago, this town tried to break me. My husband gambled, left me with 4 children and 20,000 in debt. They whispered. They condemned. They waited for me to collapse. Doyle's eyes glinted. I didn't collapse. I thrived, built businesses, raised my children right, outlived every person who judged me. She stood. You're doing the same thing, building something good despite their cruelty. That deserves support. So you'll have mine, publicly, loudly. Let them gossip about that. Samuel stood, shook her hand. Thank you, Mrs. Doyle. Don't thank me. Just do what you're planning to do. Stand up there on Sunday. Say your vows. Show them that love isn't something they get to approve or deny. Show them that choosing compassion over conformity is the bravest thing a man can do. She left. Samuel and Margaret stood in the doorway watching her buggy disappear down the road. We have allies, Margaret said quietly. One ally, but she's worth 10 regular folks. The days before the wedding blurred together. Samuel sold the North Quarter to pay the bank loan. 2,000 acres he'd worked for. Gone. But the $8,000 cleared the debt, bought them breathing room. Margaret sewed her wedding dress. Nothing fancy. Blue wool that had been Sarah Morrison's. Altered to fit. Practical, modest, beautiful in its simplicity. Jake and the remaining hands prepared the ranch for winter. Fed cattle, mended fence, stored hay. Work continued regardless of weddings or ultimatums or the town's judgment. On Saturday night, the evening before the wedding, Samuel couldn't sleep. He sat in his study, Catherine's Bible open, the telegram beside it. He read her inscription one more time. Tommy, remember when we used to read this together? I remember Catherine. I remember all of it, the good and the bad, and everything I did wrong. He picked up the telegram, the one he'd never answered. Tommy, baby coming, no money, no one. Please come. Tomorrow he'd stand in front of a church full of people who thought him foolish, who believed he was destroying himself for a woman not worth saving. They'd watch him marry Margaret Fletcher, and they'd judge. Some would celebrate, most would condemn. He didn't care, not anymore. Because tomorrow he'd choose different than he chose 5 years ago. Tomorrow he'd choose love over fear, mercy over money, compassion over comfort. Tomorrow he'd prove that Catherine's death had taught him something. Samuel folded the telegram, placed it in the Bible, closed the cover. I'm ready, Catherine. I'm finally ready to be the brother I should have been to you, to be the man you believed I could be. He lit the lamp, the brass lamp that had been his mother's, carried it to the stable, hung it on the hook where it had hung every Christmas Eve since he'd found Margaret. The flame burned steady, small but unwavering, pushing back darkness. Tomorrow that flame would burn in daylight, would witness a wedding, would mark the moment when 2 broken people chose to be whole together. Samuel stood in the stable doorway, watching the lamp, thinking about redemption, about second chances, about the courage it took to choose love when love could cost everything. Behind him, snow began to fall, soft and steady, covering old tracks, making way for new ones. Morning would come soon, and with it the reckoning. The moment when Cedar Ridge would see Samuel Morrison and Margaret Fletcher stand before God and dare anyone to call their love illegitimate. Let them come. Let them judge. Let them reveal who they really were. Samuel Morrison knew who he was. Finally, after 5 years of guilt and isolation and empty rooms, he was a man who chose mercy, who stood for what mattered, who loved a woman brave enough to walk up his road on Christmas morning with nothing but courage. Tomorrow he'd marry her. Tomorrow they'd build a life together. Tomorrow they'd show this town what redemption looked like. The lamp burned on, steady steady witness to promises about to be kept. February 25th, 1883, dawned cold and bright, the kind of morning where sunlight on snow hurt your eyes, where breath froze before it could dissipate, where the world felt scrubbed clean and waiting. Samuel Morrison woke before dawn, dressed in his only suit, black wool, pressed and clean, the suit he'd worn to Sarah's funeral 7 years ago, the suit he'd worn to sign land deals and contracts and all the business that had seemed so important before Margaret Fletcher walked into his life. He stood before the mirror, tied his tie, combed his hair, looked at the man staring back. Older than 39, hard years had carved lines deeper than time alone could manage. But his eyes looked different now, less hollow, less haunted, alive. He went to the kitchen. Margaret was already there, dressed in her blue wool dress, Sarah's dress altered to fit her smaller frame, her hair pinned up simple and clean, mother's brooch at her throat. She looked beautiful, not because of the dress or the styling, because of the light in her eyes, the set of her jaw, the way she stood straight despite every reason to hide. "Ready?" Samuel asked. Terrified, Margaret admitted. "But ready. Good. Being terrified means you understand what we're doing, what it pays, what it means." They ate breakfast in silence. Neither tasted the food. Both went through motions because rituals mattered, because normal tasks steadied shaking hands. At 9 o'clock, Jake brought the wagon around. Samuel helped Margaret up, climbed beside her. They rode toward Cedar Ridge without speaking. Words felt insufficient for what lay ahead. The church came into view, white clapboard against blue sky, steeple pointing toward heaven like an accusation or a prayer. Hard to tell which. The yard was full, wagons and horses tied everywhere. People clustered on the steps, more than Samuel had expected. Far more. The entire town had turned out, to witness, to judge, to see how this story ended. Samuel pulled the wagon to a stop, helped Margaret down, offered his arm. She took it. They walked toward the church steps together, not hurrying, not hiding, just walking. Two people choosing each other in front of everyone. The crowd parted, silence fell, everyone staring, assessing, waiting. Mrs. Doyle stood on the steps, true to her word, dressed in her finest. 15 families clustered around her, support visible and vocal. Mrs. Whitmore stood on the opposite side, face hard, Deacon Walsh beside her, at least 30 families behind them. Opposition clear and unashamed. The rest, fence-sitters, undecided, waiting to see which way the wind blew before committing. Samuel and Margaret climbed the steps. Mrs. Doyle stepped forward, took Margaret's hand. "Welcome, child. You're braver than most. Thank you for being here. Wouldn't miss it for the world." She turned to Samuel. "Show them how it's done." They entered the church. It was packed, every pew full, standing room only along the walls. The entire town crammed into this space, waiting, watching. Reverend Hayes stood at the altar, face pale but determined. He'd made his choice too. Would perform this ceremony despite the board's pressure, despite the consequences to his own position. Samuel and Margaret walked down the center aisle. Together, eyes forward. Neither looked at the faces turned toward them. Neither acknowledged the whispers that followed their progress. They reached the altar, turned to face Hayes. Behind them, the church held its breath. Hayes cleared his throat. "Dearly beloved," the traditional words, simple, ancient, beautiful in their plainness. "We are gathered here in the sight of God and this community to witness the union of Samuel Morrison and Margaret Fletcher in holy matrimony." Mrs. Whitmore stood, the scrape of her pew loud in the silence. "I object." The church erupted. Gasps, murmurs, exactly what she'd wanted. Drama, confrontation, the chance to make her condemnation public and final. Hayes raised his hand. "On what grounds this union is improper?" Mrs. Whitmore's voice carried to every corner. "This woman is of questionable character. She brings scandal to this church, to this man, to this community. I cannot stand silent while we sanction sin." Samuel turned, faced her, faced the entire congregation. "Mrs. Whitmore," his voice was calm, carried clearly. "I appreciate your concern, but you're wrong." He stepped away from the altar, Moved to the center aisle where everyone could see him, could hear him. Margaret Fletcher is the finest woman I've ever known. She's competent, kind, brave beyond measure. She survived tragedy that would have broken most people. She carried on when she had every reason to give up. She maintained her dignity when this town tried to strip it away. He looked at the faces around him, some hostile, some supportive, most uncertain. 5 years ago, my sister Catherine needed help. She was pregnant, alone, terrified. She sent me a telegram begging me to come to her. I was closing a land deal, $12,000, the biggest opportunity of my life. He pulled out the telegram, held it up so everyone could see. This is her telegram, the one I never answered, because I was too busy, too important, too concerned with building my empire to save my sister. Silence. Complete. Total. Catherine died 3 days later, her and her baby both, alone in a charity hospital, because her brother chose money over mercy, chose reputation over redemption, chose what people thought over what was right. He let that sink in. Let them see his guilt, his shame, his failure. I've lived with that for 5 years. It's destroyed everything good in me, made me hollow, made my success meaningless. Because what good is wealth if you use it to protect yourself while people you love die? He turned to Margaret. She was crying, silent tears that caught the light. Margaret Fletcher walked up my road on Christmas morning with everything she owned in a cloth bag. She chose to trust me when trust had been beaten out of her. She chose courage when courage could have killed her. He looked back at the congregation. She gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Purpose, hope, a reason to be better than I was, a chance to choose different this time. His voice rose, not shouting, but carrying, reaching every ear. Mrs. Whitmore calls her questionable. I call her heroic. Mrs. Whitmore calls this improper. I call it redemption. Mrs. Whitmore calls it sin. I call it the only thing that saved me from becoming exactly the kind of man who lets people die to protect his comfortable life. He walked to where Whitmore stood, stopped 5 feet away. Respectful distance, but present enough to make his point. You're afraid. I understand that. You're afraid that if I get away with choosing compassion over your rules, others might follow. The whole careful structure you've built to keep people in line might crumble. He turned to address everyone. But here's what I know. Jesus spent his time with tax collectors and prostitutes and the poor and the condemned. He touched lepers. He defended adulteresses. He welcomed children everyone else pushed away. He didn't spend much time at respectable dinner parties telling comfortable people they were doing great. Pause. Let that land. So if you want to condemn me for following his example, go ahead. But know what you're really condemning. You're condemning mercy. You're condemning second chances. You're condemning the idea that people can be more than their worst moments. He walked back to Margaret, took her hand, faced the congregation together. I'm marrying Margaret Fletcher today. I'm marrying her because I love her, because she makes me want to be worthy of love, because together we're going to build something good in this world despite your judgment. His voice hardened. And if you can't celebrate that with us, if you can't look at two broken people choosing to be whole together and see something beautiful, then you're welcome to leave right now. Walk out. Show everyone here exactly where you stand. Silence. No one moved. Then Mrs. Doyle stood, walked to the front, stood beside Samuel and Margaret. I'll stand with them. One of her family stood, then another, then all 15. They moved forward, created a wall of support around the couple at the altar. Mrs. Whitmore's face flushed red. This is outrageous. No. Deacon Walsh's voice, quiet but clear. Everyone turned. He was standing, but not moving to leave, not joining Whitmore's condemnation. This is courage. Walsh looked at Samuel. You're right. We've been afraid. Afraid of change. Afraid of admitting that sometimes the rules serve us more than they serve justice. He looked at Whitmore. I'm sorry, Harriet, but I can't stand with you on this. Mr. Morrison is right. If our faith means anything, it means giving people second chances. It means showing mercy. It means loving the broken instead of condemning them. Whitmore stared at him, betrayed, shocked. Then she gathered her skirts and swept out. 3 families followed her. Only 3, out of the entire congregation. The rest stayed, some because they believed, some because they were too curious to leave, but they stayed. Hayes stepped forward, voice shaking slightly but determined. If there are no further objections, he looked around. No one spoke. Then let's continue. Samuel and Margaret returned to the altar. Hands joined, both trembling, both determined. Samuel Morrison, Hayes's voice steadied. Do you take Margaret Fletcher to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death parts you? Samuel looked at Margaret, saw her, really saw her, everything she was, everything she'd survived, everything she'd become. I do, with everything I am, with everything I have, with everything I'll ever be, I do. Margaret Fletcher. Hayes turned to her. Do you take Samuel Morrison to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death parts you? Margaret's voice was clear, strong, carrying to every corner of that church. I do. Not to be saved, not to be rescued, but to stand beside a good man and build a good life. I do. Hayes smiled. First genuine smile Samuel had seen from him in weeks. By the power vested in me by Montana Territory and by the grace of God, I now pronounce you husband and wife. He paused. Let the moment breathe. Samuel, you may kiss your bride. Samuel cupped Margaret's face. Gentle, reverent, kissed her like she was precious, like she mattered more than anything else in the world. Because she did. The church exploded. Applause from Mrs. Doyle's section. Then from others. Then from most of the congregation. Not everyone. Some sat silent, disapproving, but most clapped. Most chose celebration over condemnation. Samuel and Margaret turned, faced the church as husband and wife, walked back down the aisle together. Not the same people who'd entered, transformed by choice, by courage, by the simple act of standing firm. Outside, the church bells rang. Mrs. Doyle had arranged it. They rang loud and long and joyful, announcing to all of Cedar Ridge that Samuel Morrison and Margaret Fletcher had married, that love had won, that compassion had triumphed over judgment. People poured out of the church, surrounded them, congratulated them. Not everyone, but enough, more than enough. Mrs. Doyle hugged Margaret. Welcome to the family of stubborn women who refuse to let the world tell them who they are. Jake shook Samuel's hand. Proud of you, boss. Young Tommy approached shyly. Mrs. Morrison, he corrected himself. Can we still have the school on the ranch? Margaret smiled. Yes, Tommy. School starts next week. Tell everyone. They climbed into the wagon, rode through town. People watched from windows. Some waved, some turned away. Cedar Ridge was divided now. No hiding from that. But they'd survive. Both the town and Samuel and Margaret. Back at the ranch, a small gathering waited. Mrs. Doyle had arranged it. 20 people. Food, modest celebration. Nothing fancy. Just honest joy shared among those brave enough to choose mercy. They ate. They talked. They celebrated two people who'd chosen each other despite the cost, who'd stood firm despite the pressure, who'd shown everyone watching what courage actually looked like. As evening fell, guests departed. Left Samuel and Margaret alone in their home, their ranch, their life together. They stood on the porch, watching sunset paint the mountains gold and red, Samuel's arm around Margaret's shoulders, Margaret's head against his chest. We did it, she whispered. We did. What happens now? Now we live, we build our school, we raise children if we can. We show this town that choosing love over fear was the right choice. And if they never accept us, then we accept each other. That's enough. That's more than enough. They walked to the stable together. The lamp still burned, had burned all day, waiting for them to return. Samuel lifted it down, carried it back to the house, placed it on the mantel in the parlor, where it would stay, where it would burn every evening, reminder of the night they met, promise of the life they were building. Margaret lit it, the flame caught, burned steady and bright. Two people, one light, holding back the darkness together. Outside, the first stars appeared. Montana night spread vast and cold and beautiful. Inside, Samuel and Margaret Morrison began their life together. Not perfect, not easy, but honest, real. Built on courage and compassion, and the simple choice to stand firm when standing was hard. The lamp burned on, as it would burn for the next 47 years, every night without fail. Witness to a love that chose right over easy, that chose mercy over judgment, that chose each other despite everything. Some lights guide you home, others remind you why home matters. This lamp did both, and in the glow of that steady flame, two broken people found wholeness. Two lonely souls found each other. Two survivors discovered that sometimes second chances come in pairs. The story was just beginning, but already it was beautiful. Already it was worth every kin, every sacrifice, every moment of standing firm when the world demanded they fall. Already it was redemption, complete and earned and real. The lamp burned, the night deepened, and Samuel Morrison, for the first time in 5 years, went to sleep without guilt, without ghosts, without the weight of failure crushing him. He went to sleep beside his wife, in his home, living the life he'd chosen, the life Catherine would have wanted for him, the life that proved her death had taught him something worth learning. Choose love, choose mercy, choose courage. Everything else was just noise. The snow fell soft against the window of Morrison Ranch. December 1929. The fire crackled in the study. Emma Morrison, 12 years old, sat on the ottoman watching her grandfather, waiting for the story to end, knowing somehow that it already had. Samuel Morrison, 86 years old, now closed Catherine's Bible. The telegram slipped out, fell to his lap. He picked it up, smooth from handling, faded from time, but still there, still carried. That's when you lit the lamp, Emma said. That night in the stable, that night Samuel confirmed, and every night after, for 47 years. Your grandmother and I never let it go dark. Is Grandma why you kept it burning? Samuel looked at his granddaughter, thought about Margaret, gone just 1 year now. After 46 years of marriage, after raising 3 children from the orphan train and 2 born to them, after building a school that taught hundreds, after creating a life that mattered. Your grandmother is part of it. But the lamp means something bigger. It means you don't let people die in darkness. Not when you can bring light. Not when you can choose mercy over fear. He stood, walked to the window. The stable lamp burned in the distance, as it had burned every Christmas Eve since 1882. That lamp taught me that real strength isn't about making people afraid. It's about making them feel safe. About standing firm when standing costs everything. About choosing love even when love looks like foolishness to people who've forgotten what courage means. Can we go see it? Emma asked. Samuel smiled, put on his coat, took his granddaughter's hand. They walked out into the Montana night, snow falling soft and steady, stars burning overhead like promises kept. The stable was warm, the lamp hung where it had always hung, its flames steady and bright, pushing back darkness. Samuel lifted Emma up so she could see it better. Every Christmas Eve I light this lamp, for your grandmother, for Catherine, for everyone who chose courage when courage was hard, for everyone who stood firm when the world demanded they fall. It's beautiful, Emma whispered. Samuel set her down, looked at the flame, thought about Margaret in her blue dress, about Catherine's telegram, about the choice that defined his life. No child, it's true, and truth is always beautiful. They stood together in the stable, old man and young girl, generations connected by story, by choices made decades before Emma was born, by love that persisted beyond death. The lamp burned on, as it always had, as it always would, and as long as someone remembered why it mattered, as long as someone chose light over darkness, mercy over judgment, love over fear. That was the Morrison legacy, not land or money or success, but the simple act of keeping promises, of standing firm, of choosing what mattered even when it cost everything. Samuel Morrison had learned that lesson late, but he'd learned it well, and he'd spent 47 years living it, teaching it, passing it on. Now Emma knew it too, and someday she'd tell her children, and they'd tell theirs, and the story would continue. The lamp would burn, the lesson would persist. Choose courage, choose compassion, choose love. Everything else was just noise, Samuel and Emma walked back to the house. The lamp burned behind them, steady witness to a life well lived, to choices made right, to redemption earned through standing firm. Inside, Samuel sat in his chair, picked up Catherine's Bible one more time, opened it to the inscription. Tommy, remember when we used to read this together? I remember, Catherine. I remember it all, and I did what you would have wanted. I chose differently. I chose better. I chose love. He closed the Bible, closed his eyes, and for the first time since Margaret died, he felt peace. Complete. Total. The kind that comes from knowing you lived right, that your life mattered, that you left the world better than you found it. Emma curled up beside him, safe, loved, knowing her grandfather was a good man, knowing the lamp would burn, knowing some promises were kept forever. Outside Montana, night deepened. The lamp glowed steady in the stable, and Samuel Morrison drifted into sleep, content, complete, ready for whatever came next, because he'd lived well, loved well, chosen well, and in the end that was all anyone could do. The lamp burned on, and would burn, as long as anyone remembered why light mattered, why mercy mattered, why choosing courage over fear was the only choice that ever really counted. The story was complete, the circle closed, the promise kept, and the lamp that never dimmed continued its vigil. Steady flame against darkness, proof that one choice made right could illuminate 47 years, could change everything, could redeem even the deepest failure. Samuel Morrison had been a coward once, had let his sister die while he chased wealth, but he'd learned, he'd changed, he'd chosen differently when given a second chance, and that second chance became a life, became a legacy, became a story worth telling. The lamp burned, the snow fell, and in the warm house on Morrison Ranch, an old man and a young girl sat together, connected by story, by blood, by the simple truth that choosing love over fear is the bravest thing anyone can do. That was the lesson. That was the legacy. That was the redemption. And it was enough, more than enough. It was everything.